I begin the video at Plum Creek Meadow. Apologies for the burnouts. This park sits right between Sauk Village and the Indiana state line. Plum Creek Meadow is probably the best asset of Sauk Village. And as we go along with the video, you'll see that Sauk Village appears to be in the beginning stages of decline. Currently, it looks nothing like a Harvey or Chicago Heights, dare I say a Fort Heights, but it just might be trending in that direction, and in several decades, Sauk Village might end up being in the same condition as those places. This is Sauk Trail, which we can talk about the historical significance of it later. Right here it passes by what looks to be some preserved wetland areas. Well, Sauk Village is in the extreme southeastern portion of Cook County, in an area that's almost rural but not quite, as it's on the extreme outer layer of suburbia, if you will. It's about an hour's drive from the Chicago Loop, depending on the traffic. The community has a high poverty rate, a high crime rate, and no jobs. Apparently no good grocery stores either, unless a corner liquor store is good enough for you. In some of the places that I've lived in the past, the joke of the town used to be that the only career goal that you could achieve in that town would be if you want to be the manager of the grocery store, whether it's a Walmart, whether it's a local mom and pop, whatever it is. Well, guess what? In Sauk Village, you can't make that joke because there are no grocery stores. A search on Google Maps proves it. Several years ago, more residents complained to Chicago's CBS affiliate, saying how Sauk Village had become a danger zone. The first sentence in the article says how neighbors were finding bullet holes in the sides of their homes. So yeah, not good. While Sauk Village, or should I say Sauk Village, doesn't share the same levels of abandonment and blight that some of the other nearby communities do, it does have something more in common with the other stepchildren of South Cook County, that being corruption, as there's been a handful of corruption charges among village leaders throughout the years. One of them being this case, where former village treasurer James Griegel was found guilty for embezzling over $20,000 to his name back in February 2016. From 2015 to 2016, Griegel issued pension fund checks to himself while forging the signatures of Sauk Village officials on those checks. Griegel also falsely listed names of events and conferences on the checks to make them appear to be business-related expenses. He ended up spending the money at gas stations, rental car locations, restaurants, and a storage unit, according to FBI findings. Not only that, but Griegel is mostly remembered for being in possession of heroin during a routine traffic stop in 2016. Griegel was 71 years old that year and had been purchasing heroin multiple times per week for his then-girlfriend in exchange for some happy nights. Speaking of happy nights, Thomas Ryan could tell you all about them when he was sentenced to 8 years in Stony Lonesome. Ryan is a former Sauk Village school superintendent who, back in 2005, was also ordered to pay $400,000 in restitution to give back the money that he stole from the school district. Ryan stole $68,000 from the district to pay for his daughter's college tuition. Additionally, he gave $72,000 to a friend to do some utility work. It's also documented that Ryan stole that money to pay for other things, including a football for Mike Ditka to sign, along with tickets to pro sporting events and flowers. But wait, there's more. Back in 2012, another story came out of Sauk Village. This time, it was the drinking water. The village was ordered to provide bottled water that year due to higher than acceptable levels of vinyl chloride in the village's well water. The state of Illinois investigated the water system for Sauk Village and determined that the water was safe to drink. However, the U.S. EPA had stated that there is no safe level of vinyl chloride in drinking water. Drinking the chemical in tap water can cause damage to the liver, lungs, and kidneys. Breathing it in as a vapor can cause immune disorders and can damage the liver, kidneys, and nerves. A press release later that year, however, showed that the Illinois EPA claimed that the vinyl chloride was no longer present in Sauk Village wells. And whether you should believe them or not, well, that's your decision to make. That same year, 2012, Sauk Village curiously eliminated the position of the police chief, stating that the fire chief would take on those added responsibilities, even though the fire chief had no experience as a police officer. In 2018, an article highlights that according to the FBI, towns across the country with a population of around 10,000 people see an average of 34 police officers. Sauk Village, however, had only 18 that year. Heck, do a search for Sauk Village on YouTube. Go ahead, do it. Other than my video, all you're going to see would be videos from various Chicago market TV stations that include headlines like Illinois State Police investigate Sauk Village police shooting of juvenile, Sauk Village shooting, 1 killed, 1 injured in shooting outside of Sauk Village home. The list goes on. Seemingly, the list doesn't end. Point is that with all of this crime and corruption that's been going on in teeny tiny Sauk Village over the years, all signs are pointing towards Sauk Village becoming another Harvey, another Chicago Heights, dare I say another Fort Heights. It's sad, but I think it's highly likely to be true. I mean, I plan on doing this YouTube thing for a long time, and I've just gotten started on it, so maybe I can come back in 10 years, 20 years, and see what the test of time has done to this place, but at the time of me making this video, I would be shocked if the population of Sauk Village doesn't dip below 9,000 by the 2030 census, based on how things have been going here. 1,000 less people means hundreds of more abandoned homes. Right now in 2024, you're just starting to see boarded up windows pop up here and there as you cruise through the neighborhoods. Stephen Bull 322 would like to chime in, and he said that he saw this happening 10 years ago. There was an abandoned home on every block apparently in Sauk Village. Well, I'll say this. The houses here kind of look like they're made of a bunch of cheap crap. And no, Karen, I'm not trying to insult the people who live here, okay? I'm just saying that the houses here look like they're made of a bunch of cheap crap. For example, I'm going to guess that the insulation in a lot of these homes isn't very good. It kind of seems like the home building company that built these homes, they were on a tight budget and they went with the Sears model or something. A lot of these homes were built within the 60s and 70s. That's when Sauk Village saw most of its growth. So back then, codes were different, and a lot of these homes are just smaller and made of a bunch of cheap crap. Back in the 60s and 70s, codes were less restrictive, standards were lower, and home building companies could get away with cheaper building materials. And if you're a Sauk Village resident and you're still offended by me saying that your homes are made of a bunch of cheap crap, well, I see this all over the country, everywhere I go, and I used to live in Indianapolis. That place is the capital of cheap, crappy building material for their houses, as long as you're not in Hamilton County. But anywhere else you go in suburban Indianapolis, all of the homes there are made of a bunch of cheap crap just like this, and a lot of it was built in the 60s and 70s, so yeah, this is all over the place. And if you still feel like I'm singling you out, Sauk Village people, yeah, sorry about you, can't help you. Well, here's the population history for good old Sauk Village. Originally peaking in 1980 at just under 11,000 people, Sauk Village then lost 1,000, or 9% of its population, only to grow again to be above 10,000 by 2000, and then the growth stayed stagnant the following 10 years, only for it to shrink by 5% in the 2020 census. So basically, Sauk Village has been flirting with decline for the better part of the last 40 years. The only difference now is that it's here to stay. At least, I believe it is. The following numbers I'm about to share might make you believe that too. The latest estimates show that Sauk Village is now home to less than 9,500 people, or a 4.4% decline since 2020's official count. The median household income is very low at $50,000 per year. Only 17% of adults 25 and older hold a bachelor's degree or higher, and the median value of owner-occupied housing units is $82,000, while the poverty rate is 28%, or a rate that's higher than 1 out of every 4. On to the crime rates now, as the violent crime rate is well over 3,500 for every 100,000 residents. You can breathe a sigh of relief, though, when you see the property crime numbers, as those aren't as bad. Really, it's just loads of reported assaults that are making the violent crime rate so high, but still, that's a really bad violent crime rate. The only data I could find on how many homicides are reported here per year was back in 2020 when there were 6. For a town of 10,000, which Sauk Village essentially was at that time, that's terrible. 1 murder is bad, obviously, but 6? For a town of 10,000? Yeah, that's really bad. The data also suggests that 1 out of every 27 people in Sauk Village is bound to be a victim of violent crime, so even more reason that I believe that people will continue to flee Sauk Village for greener pastures. Heck, even the city of Dyer, Indiana, is in less of dire straits than Sauk Village is.
Good one.
Well, while we continue to drive around and see the neighborhoods that make up this place, let's talk about the history. And for a place without a downtown, Sauk Village actually has a pretty long history. Before European settlement, or pre-1820, the land that modern-day Sauk Village sits on was a major crossing for Native Americans. In fact, modern-day Sauk Trail that heads through town is actually the path of an ancient Indian trail called the Sauk Trail. It stretched from Detroit to Rock Island, where it ended at the Mississippi River. Today, the portion through extreme southern Cook County is the only stretch of the old trail that is still called Sauk Trail. Parts of the original trail are no longer in existence, but most of it is paved over by highways, so today you can actually drive most of the original route. The reason why the trail passed this far south of Lake Michigan is because the land here is on a ridge that's a little bit higher in elevation than what you'll see in places that are north of here. Places that are closer to Lake Michigan like Gary, Hammond, East Chicago, Calumet City, and the far southeastern portion of the modern-day Chicago city limits were all swampland before European settlers developed it into an industrial mecca. Believe it or not, the Sauk Trail actually predates Native Americans, as it goes back as long as 12,000 years ago. It has something to do with the way that the glaciers melted during the Ice Age or some crap like that. Well, the trail is said to have been first carved out in land by migrating mastodons. That's right, and scientists believe that the Sauk Trail is the longest found mastodon trail to this day. So these trails were carved into the land by the giant animals, and then in the late 1600s or so, Native Americans started to use them for the hashtag nomad life. Yes, that's what they said back then. Hashtag nomad life. That's even where the word hashtag originated from. In fact, it was found by an archaeologist in a buried stone right here in Sauk Village when they were tearing up some, old pavement on the old Sauk Trail, and they were putting in some new concrete back in 2004. Yeah, well, they were tearing it up, and while they were digging, archaeologists from Northwestern University were called to the site when a construction worker found a historic stone that was underneath the roadbed, and engraved in that stone was hashtag nomad life. The archaeologist said that the stone was dated to be as old as 1623. Okay, yeah, I made that up, but you get the idea. The name Sauk, of course, comes from the Sauk tribe who lived throughout the Great Lakes region. Later on, the trail was used by other Native American tribes, such as the Potawatomi. Fast forward to 1825, and then President Andrew Jackson ordered the Sauk Trail to be surveyed for a military road between Detroit and Chicago, and it didn't take long for construction on that to start. So the Sauk Trail was the first road between Detroit and Chicago. Take that, I-94, you good-for-nothing death trap. In 1837, much of the road was complete. For 1837 standards, that is, which is no better than a muddy farmer's lane. Travel took anywhere from 5 to 7 days between Detroit and Chicago depending on the weather. It stayed that way for almost a century as it wasn't paved until 1924. Nonetheless, Sauk Trail is one of the oldest automotive corridors in the United States. On to other history of the area, as modern settlers first came to the area from the East Coast in 1838. Most of the settlers had German and French roots, with a large chunk of the original cast of characters being from Strasbourg, France. That being said, a postmaster gave the community the name of Strasbourg in the mid-1800s. This 1861 map lists Strasbourg as being one of the handful of post offices in Cook County at the time, but the name is misspelled, and it's not labeled on the map. The first church was built in 1847, that being St. Jacob's Church, later called St. James Church, but it was destroyed when struck by lightning in 1871. A second church was built near the corner of modern-day Sauk Trail and 394, but it was torn down in 2004. It's actually impressive that it lasted that long. Today there's a gravel trail that leads up to where the church stood, and there's a cemetery that remains behind it. Here's an aerial photo from 1938. You can see Fort Heights starting to take shape. Further south, Strasbourg was nothing more than a church and several farm homes. Strasbourg remained as a very small, rural-like community for a long time. It wasn't until the 1950s when 394, or the Calumet Expressway, was complete. Once it was, the area was seen as a great spot to develop real estate almost right away. Obviously, the Calumet Expressway made it much easier to reach Chicago and other industrial centers to the north. The first housing additions were completed by 1956. On March 12, 1957, the village of Sauk Village was officially incorporated. It was also at this point when the place stopped being called Strasbourg, as there was already a village called Strasbourg in central Illinois. Anyway, as I mentioned earlier, most of the growth in Sauk Village occurred during the 60s and 70s, and it's been a traditional suburban community throughout its existence. You know, developed due to expressway infrastructure, no traditional downtown ever. Yeah, that's the definition of suburban sprawl right there. In the 1980s, some minor industrial growth occurred in the far northern and northwestern portions of the village. The latest subdivision was completed in the 90s. It was also around this time that the community started to change from being a white, blue-collar, lower-middle-class community to being a black community. And today the population is nearly 70% black. Overall, the population count has stayed stagnant ever since 1980, but this time, as I've mentioned before, it seems to be in the beginning stages of a long, steady, slow, yet consistent population decline. Sauk Village never really had any jobs. It was always a working-class community. The jobs to be found were either up north in Gary, Hammond, or Chicago, or they were to the west in Chicago Heights, or to the northwest, as Harvey had an abundance of industrial jobs at one point as well. Other south suburbs had large factories too, but once those jobs disappeared, it had a huge negative effect on the Calumet region as a whole. It wasn't just one city here or a pair of cities there, it was the entire region that was mostly built on the steel industry and other large manufacturers in oil and car making. Today, there's only a few communities on the Illinois side of the Calumet region that I would say are doing okay. Those places being Homewood, Lansing, and I would even consider South Holland to be a suburb that's doing okay, especially when compared to the rest of the South suburbs. Anyway, point is that Sauk Village isn't alone in this. It's a regional problem, and more recently it's been exposed as a state of Illinois problem, as all of the suburban growth, residential, industrial, and commercial, has been occurring in the neighboring Lake County, Indiana, due to the relaxed policies and taxes that are seen in the Hoosier state. That being said, South Cook County will probably continue to struggle for a long, long time. It'll take years and years of consistent leadership at the local levels between the different communities and at the state level too, and to be honest, who can see that happening? Isn't that right, Tiffany Henyard?
Loser.
Up ahead on the left, we'll be passing by Bloom Trail High School, home of the Trailblazers. Bloom Trail High School serves students from Sauk Village and Ford Heights. There are no notable alumni listed on the high school's Wikipedia page, and no other website keeps good track of that, but for Sauk Village, some of the notable residents who have lived here at one point or another would be comedian Jeff Allen and actor Corey Hardricht. Well, people, it is now that time. What did we learn in this video? We learned, again, that you can't always trust an Illinois Village trustee, and you can't always trust free sushi, but you can always trust Chris's livability score. The first category is education. Bloom Trail High School, just like many of the other high schools in southern Cook County, performs really low academically. It's worse than Bloom High School in Chicago Heights, which is another economically struggling city. It's ranked towards the bottom out of all of Chicago area high schools on US News. Education gets a 4 out of 20. Crime is next, and we've gone over that. It's a big issue here. It gets a 4 out of 20. Since there is no downtown Sauk Village, that's an easy one, 0 out of 20 there. Next up is the economy, and it gets a 4 out of 20. No good jobs to be had anywhere in the vicinity. The ones that you can find are places like the Ford plant in Chicago Heights, but that's not a stable job to be had, so yeah, tough luck finding much of anything. You might be better off just heading east into Indiana for employment, or maybe become one of the political figures here in South Cook County and just be corrupt and steal money. Well, recreational opportunities is next, and there are some nice woodsy areas nearby. You of course have Indiana Dunes National Lakeshore, but that can be over a half hour's drive away depending on what bipolar stage I-94 is in. Recreation gets a 4 out of 20. History is next, and while I raved about the historical significance of the Sauk Trail, the village itself didn't develop until the Calumet Expressway came through. They also tore down the only historically relevant building back in 2004, that being the church, so history gets a 9 out of 20. But the points come in from being along the ancient Sauk Trail, and of course with the stretch of the trail through Cook County being the only stretch along the trail that has kept its original name, and of course with Sauk Village being called as such as well. Well, amenities is next, and what amenities? Is this a joke? You know, you have a dollar store, a few gas stations, and a few discount tobacco and liquor stores? Come on, that's a very poor showing, 2 out of 20 there. The neighboring Dyer, Indiana is the lone saving grace in that category. Lastly, the cost of living is the best thing about Sauk Village, but it could be better. The median value of owner-occupied housing is $82,000, yet on Zillow, the current homes listed for Sauk Village are asking for more than double that amount. You'd be better off paying those same prices 2 miles east in Dyer. If you're a home buyer and you have family in Sauk Village, do yourself a favor and buy in Dyer, not here. Cost of living gets a 14 out of 20 because of the much better options that are available 2 miles to the east. And quite frankly, I really don't like Sauk Village's future. I see the population continuing to decline, which means lower home values, and yeah, don't spend 150 or 200 grand on a home in Sauk Village. All in all, the Chris livability score for Sauk Village, Illinois is 41 out of 160. And what do you know? Only 1 point higher than the lowest on the list so far in the neighboring Ford Heights. Well, I haven't really come across a place like Sauk Village before, but it reminds me a lot of the east side of Indianapolis. It also reminds me a lot of a small subdivision that I saw in the neighboring city of Ford Heights. So to see a video on Ford Heights, you can check out this video here. Peace.